back to my channel. Today's video is almost like a solved no body, and I am doing the same type of video next Saturday as well. I decided to put them as missing persons because the cases themselves aren't exactly like a lot of the other solved no body cases that I have covered. They both are at a point where they desperately need a good big public push to keep the case moving along. So today's video is on a little girl named Brandy Myers that was 13 years old when she disappeared. And the reason I know about this case is through CrimeCon. So Brandy has a sister named Kristin, and Kristin was walking around CrimeCon. She had a clipboard with a big old stack of papers, and finally when I was able to speak to her, I found out the story of her sister, which is shocking and so incredibly frustrating, and I'm about to get into it in a minute. But she was having people sign papers to send to a specific county to basically put public pressure on them to actually do something about her sister's case. They've done a really big public push lately on social media, especially Twitter. So I want to put a disclaimer on this case as well, just like last week's case with Faith Hedgepeth. This is definitely brutal. I will be describing a murder in this. I will be describing just a bunch of different inappropriate things. So again, if you are a child or you are around children, now is probably not the best time to watch this video. So Brandy was 13 years old when she disappeared on May 26, 1992. And as I said, this is more of a solved no body case, but it is probably one of the most frustrating ones that I've covered so far. So Brandy and her family lived in a little apartment in Phoenix, Arizona in the Sunny Slope neighborhood. And they were only about, I think it was 3 blocks away from their school. So they played a lot in their neighborhood. It was known to be a safe neighborhood. It was a very different time than now. You know, I was born in 1992, and I still, growing up at this girl's age, the age of 13, I still did the things she was doing, walked around the neighborhood. You know, it was a different place. You didn't expect anyone to harm you. You didn't expect to be taken. But unfortunately, that is what happened to Brandy. So Brandy and Kristin, her sister, the one that I met, were playing in the neighborhood that day, and they were supposed to go door to door for a book-a-thon that Brandy was participating in. And they had already gone and taken pledges from people. They just walked their normal route to school, something they were comfortable with. You know, it's in their neighborhood, only 3 blocks, so they felt safe. And again, this was something that was normal back then. So they already had a list of names and addresses, houses to go to, but somehow that list had completely vanished. So they had to just kind of wing it and pretty much go to every door instead of just the doors where there had already been pledges made to donate this money. It wasn't a huge deal, but I think that's part of the reason these next circumstances unfolded. So Brandy was about to head out and start going door to door, and Kristin decided that she no longer wanted to go with her. Kristin had a boyfriend at the time. I'm pretty sure Kristin was 11, so she was younger than Brandy, only by about 2 years, but it was one of those situations where she wanted to be a cool little sister, and she wanted to hang out with her new boyfriend, and her sister was a dork, and you know, just a typical sibling situation. So Brandy ended up leaving on her own to go out door to door, and Kristin watched her as she started off her walk in the direction she knew she was supposed to go, and she watched her turn a corner, but that would be the very last time she would see her sister. I don't know an exact time that Brandy left her home that day, but I do know it was early afternoon, and no one really realized she was missing or did anything about it until Brandy and Kristin's mother got home later on that night. So there had been a babysitter there watching the kids. This babysitter knew Brandy was out and going door to door. And when their mother got home, the babysitter informed her that Brandy never came home from this book-a-thon adventure, and they couldn't find her anywhere. So authorities were immediately called. And again, very different time, so this sent everyone into a panic. By the time the authorities got there, they had the entire neighborhood apartment complex taped off. They had had helicopters, they had dogs, they had a ton of police officers because this type of thing was not very common. And this is kind of when the whole neighborhood realized that going door to door was not something as safe as they thought it used to be. So authorities started questioning people in the apartment complex, and this little girl came forward and claimed to know what happened to Brandy. So this girl claims that she met up with Brandy at some point, and Brandy decided to go to Smitty's, which was a store, but this store was in the opposite direction of the route that she would have taken. So basically, her house was here in the center, she would have gone this way, this is where her school was, but Smitty's was this way. So totally separate direction. It would have taken much, much longer to get to Smitty's. And this little girl claimed that Brandy basically wanted to spend this book-a-thon money on candy and toys, which already did not seem quite right to a lot of people that knew her. But this girl said when they got there, she had to use the restroom and Brandy didn't want to go with her. So she decided to stand and wait outside. And this girl claims that when she came out of the restroom to look for Brandy, Brandy wasn't there. To authorities, Smitty now seemed like the most logical place to look for Brandy. Authorities searched all in the area of Smitty's, the neighborhood surrounding it. From what I know, there was a pedophile in that direct neighborhood besides Smitty's, so they were sure at this point they had solved what happened to her. But unfortunately, they found her absolutely nowhere, so they started a more extensive search. They questioned people in Brandy's neighborhood. They went and re-questioned people at the apartment complex. Unfortunately, this search would just unveil more questions that would later possibly be linked to what might have happened to Brandy. 2 days after Brandy disappeared, while searching for Brandy, a teenage girl's body was found in the trash, and she had been strangled to death. Now, this teenager would become a Jane Doe that would remain unidentified until 2011, and she was found in 1992. And the girl's story is absolutely heartbreaking. She has not been linked directly at all to Brandy's case or other cases I will get into in a little bit, but there is still a high possibility. So the girl that was found was Shannon Amick, and she was 16 years old, and she had basically been in and out of the foster and adoption system her entire life. Her mother had her when she was incredibly young, and I think at about 3 years old she was put into the foster system. She was adopted when she was 3, but the family decided to return her back to CPS at the age of about 10 or 11 because she had incredibly bad behavioral issues. She jumped around from foster homes to group homes to juvenile detention facilities. She was said to have a chronic runaway problem where she ran away, I think it was 40 plus times in a very short period of time. So the last time she ran away before her body was discovered, there was literally no record of it. I think the family did talk to CPS, the family that was fostering her, but CPS never reported it to police. And then soon after, CPS actually filed to revoke their rights when it came to Shannon, and unfortunately for her, it was granted. So no one was looking for her. No one knew to identify her when her body was discovered. I find that very odd because this girl was kind of blasted all over Phoenix. So the people that had cared about her at one point couldn't even call in and identify her. Just a really, really heartbreaking story. They went on later on to try to connect cases and realized that this girl had gone missing at some point, and they had to go ask her mom for a DNA sample. So the biological mom that gave her up, and that's how they matched her. But she could be someone that is linked to this giant list of cases that Brandy is linked to as well. So this was obviously a major hiccup in the search. This took them an entire different direction. This made them wonder if there was a serial killer on the loose and if Brandy became a victim of this serial killer. And then more bodies started being discovered. So on November 9th, 1992, just a few months after Brandy went missing, a decapitated body was found in a small field between the Arizona Canal and a park. and the body wasn't identified until about 11 days later when they found the head stuck in a grate in the canal. The body belonged to 22-year-old Angela Brasso, and Angela had lived with her boyfriend at the time, and she decided to leave on November 8th from their home on a purple Diamondback mountain bike, and she never came home, so he reported her missing, and that is at that point the only reason they were able to identify her along with her head that was found. She had been stabbed multiple times. However, despite all of the searches, her bike was never found. So now they had a missing girl and two young women that had been brutally murdered. I mean, this girl was decapitated and left in a field in the middle of plain sight. Like, whoever did this had absolutely no regard at all. And then another body was found. Just 10 months later, in September of 1993, 17-year-old high school student Melanie Burness took a bike ride, and she also never returned, just like Angela Brasso. She was reported missing, and I think it was only a day or so later her body was discovered also in the Arizona Canal. So Angela's case and Melanie's case were essentially identical. So both girls were found in the Arizona Canal. They both had been riding their bike. They both were younger females, and they both had been assaulted and killed with a knife. And Melanie's bike also was never found. With these two brutal murders, authorities had something they didn't have in Brandy's case, a body. But even more than that, they had DNA. So there was a sexual assault on one of these girls and an attempted sexual assault on the other, but the killer left behind his DNA. And with further testing, they were able to confirm that the killer was the same person for both Angela and Melanie. And this was in 1992, 1993, so DNA testing did exist. It was just in its baby stages, but testing got better as time went. Eventually, this would help crack these cases, but for years, they remained a mystery. And at this point, again, there were 3 girls that were found dead and 1 girl that was missing, all in a very short period of time in the same location. So at this point, Angela and Melanie's case kind of went quiet. They had the DNA, but they didn't have who the DNA belonged to, and they were just hoping for more pieces to solve the puzzle. And Brandy's case, unfortunately, didn't just go quiet, it went cold. Brandy's family, I can't even say those words without about crying. Brandy's family was destroyed, and this is probably the one thing that really stuck out to me when I spoke to Kristin. In Kristin's words, their entire family died when Brandy didn't come back home. Everyone deals with things in very different ways, and some families become closer. Some families, you know, a couple of them kind of stray off and cope in their own ways, and then a couple stay together. But unfortunately with Brandy's family, everyone just got to the point where they were so distraught and heartbroken and defeated with no answers and nothing left behind. She literally went out for a walk and just didn't come back and left nothing behind to show at all what happened to her. So they kind of ignored it and they didn't know how to cope with it. She's standing by herself. I know she has, I think, a few people at this point. I don't know if they're friends or family that are helping her, but she's by herself. And there was no body. It seemed like there was no hope. Despite massive searches, amazing cold case detectives, they seemed absolutely no closer to answers. I feel like that's just the epitome of this case, is just this feeling of helplessness, and so I'm hoping we will be able to change that. Everyone was very, very focused on these 2 canal murders by the now known Canal Killer. And so because there was no body with Brandy, because there was no information, it's almost like what happened to her got pushed to the back and it just wasn't focused on. And then something absolutely massive happened. In 2014, a genealogist worked to identify the possible surname of Angela and Melanie's killer by tracking the paternal lineage of the Y chromosome. So basically, all the things happening with genealogy right now, it's essentially the same thing that was used back then. And they were able to track down a surname of Miller. And when this was given to authorities, they actually had someone on their list of potential suspects with the last name of Miller. And his name was Brian Patrick Miller, to be exact. And this is the man we are putting on blast in this video. They already had the DNA, now they had a possible name, so they went and tracked Brian Miller down and DNA tested him, and it was a match. They had who killed Angela and Melanie and left their bodies brutally beaten and stabbed in the canal. What made this worse was Brian Miller's record. The fact that a man like this had been free for so long despite the record he had will make you question absolutely everything. And if your neighbor could be someone like this, because this man should not have been allowed to be living the life that he was living, and you are going to be shocked and horrified at what this man did and how he pretty much escaped the system so many times. So at 15 years old, Brian was put into a juvenile detention center for the first time. I can't recall for exactly what, but putting him in this facility did not change his attitude or obsession with crime in the slightest. He had been forced to undergo a treatment plan, and I say that very, very, very loosely, where he was labeled as superior in intelligence, but he was highly aggressive. He was very immature when it came to his emotional maturity level. He was frustrated, angry, destructive, impulsive, depressed. These are all of the things that this treatment plan noticed when it came to his behavior, and they believed that he desperately needed to work through major issues when it came to his sexuality, which is going to come into play a little bit later in this video. 2 months after he was released from the program, he went on to stab someone for the first time at the age of 16. This young woman, 18 years old, was walking on her way to work, and he thought, hey, I'm stabbing this woman in the back. So when they asked Brian, after they detained him, after stabbing this woman in the back, when they asked him why he did it, his response was to see what it feels like. When someone responds after stabbing someone with, I just wanted to see what it felt like, that's when you're like, okay, you have the potential of being a serial killer, something needs to be done. He was charged, well, he was supposed to be charged with aggravated assault, and they were attempting to try him as an adult despite the fact that he was just 16 years old. But they later abandoned this in exchange for Brian pleading guilty to attempted second-degree murder as a juvenile. So if you're not aware, it's a very different system when you are charged with something as a juvenile as opposed to an adult. I think that's fairly obvious. I think it was just the better option in this case, because when you have a 16-year-old being tried as an adult, it has a lot higher chance to be thrown out, even for something like aggravated assault. So people have a hard time viewing minors as being capable of doing things like he did. And I think they just felt more comfortable knowing he would be charged as a minor with this different charge, but he probably would be detained for a less amount of time. It would affect him in different ways. So I think just to make sure he got some sort of punishment, that's why they went with being charged as a juvenile. So he was placed in a detention facility until he turned 18, and I'm pretty sure this is actually when he had his treatment plan. But unfortunately, at the age of 18, he had to be released. He was no longer a minor. And only 2 years after being released is when he would go on to decapitate Angela Brasso. So clearly he had no intentions of stopping. And to kind of look back, and again, as I've said in the past few videos, hindsight's 2020, you know, but he had done something before. He wasn't just a bad kid struggling with things. He had stabbed a girl in the back for the hell of it. And the fact that he was able to go out again after being said to have had these destructive patterns of behavior and basically was given the opportunity to do it again is absolutely infuriating. And I kind of looked up the laws in Arizona. At least now they have changed their system to where they will charge, I think, either 15 to 16-year-olds and up with aggravated assault as an adult instead of a minor. So at least that's changed, I guess, but I really wish that was in place before this man was able to just kind of run free. So Brian was arrested on January 13th and is charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder for both Angela and Melanie, 2 counts of kidnapping, and then the 1 count of sexual assault and another count of attempted sexual assault. So he is being charged, and from what I know, he's either in court right now or it all just finished. I'm not 100% sure, but when this was released, people started coming forward and telling stories of their own when it comes to Brian Miller, and this really lit a fire that brought Brandy's case back in the spotlight. So some stories just showed his odd behavior. For example, he had a friend that was an artist, and Brian was really into cosplay and, you know, imaginary worlds and situations. And when he was in his treatment, I guess, time period, I think it's such a joke, honestly, they said that the way he managed his issues, his anger and aggression and all of that, was through fantasy. I think it was more of an enabler than a way to manage it, but I'm not a professional. So he would go often to costume parties. He actually bought an old cop car and called it the Zombie Hunter car. He covered it in fake blood and painted it crazy things, put Zombie Hunter on the back of it. He would drive around the town dressed up as a zombie hunter in this creepy long coat, and he would be wearing a scary, very terrifying mask. He made these elaborate guns, and he would drive around town, and he actually took pictures with police officers, the same officers that were trying to find the Canal Killer, and he was the Canal Killer, and trying to find justice for Brandy. They were taking pictures with this man. He was going through town being a zombie hunter, and if that isn't giving this little glimpse into who he really was, like I said, I don't think it was a way for him to manage his anger and hostility. I think it was a way for him to justify it and continue acting out upon it and basically rub it in everybody's face. So again, he met this friend that was a sketch artist, wanted to be a police sketch artist eventually, but when those dreams didn't go well, he started creating a lot of parody sketches, and after seeing Brian at a party dressed as a leprechaun, he decided to draw this parody of a wanted poster and said, you know, have you seen this man wanted, last seen as a leprechaun, and he drew Brian's face on it and posted it to Facebook, and he expected Brian to find it hilarious. He said that obviously Brian was into playing characters and these fantasy worlds, so he thought Brian was going to love it, but Brian flipped out. Brian did not like it. The guy thought, you know, did I just make him look in a way he didn't like or what? But now we know he didn't like it because his face was on a wanted poster, and that was one of his biggest fears. So not only did that happen, but something massive in Brandy's case happened. You know, people were just coming out of the woodworks at this point saying, you know, he did this weird thing this one time, he did this weird thing this other time, and it was all kind of starting to make sense. But even more groundbreaking was that Brian's ex-wife came forward to authorities. So Brian had moved away from Phoenix in 1998 and moved to Washington, and there's absolutely no telling how many people he might have killed in Washington. But he married a woman named Amy. They had a daughter, I'm pretty positive, and they moved back to Phoenix in 2003 to 2005, I think it was. By 2006, they were divorced, but it was because of his behavior. Amy claimed that Brian was really into S&M, and that was something that they were, enjoying in their relationship. But the longer their relationship went on, and in the years before they got divorced, it quickly turned into very violent acts. It wasn't just for pleasure or fun anymore, it was violent. So he started involving, you guessed it, knives. He started becoming very obsessive when it came to pornography. Things just started escalating very quickly.
He said if he didn't love me so much, he would kill me.
And one day, he nearly did.
Brian had used a knife and had cut off my hair, telling me that he had done that in place of slicing my throat.
She felt very threatened at this point, and it didn't seem like it was just stories anymore and fun and games. And to make things even more terrifying, he started telling her stories during these encounters where he would describe these horrific things he did to women. One of the stories that he talked about was what he did to Brandy. And again, at that point in time, she just thought they were made up stories, but when she realized that he had been arrested for being the Canal Killer and was linked to multiple other cases possibly, she realized these weren't just stories anymore. And imagine being married to a man and thinking this is all fun and games, and thinking this is all just this fantasy world that he's been so wrapped up in for years, only to find out that all of it was real. He probably was serious when he said that he wanted to kill her and that he decided to cut her hair off instead of her throat. She was inches and seconds away from death at all times, more than likely. I'm sure she's thanking her lucky stars at this point that she left him. But she decided to tell authorities that she believed she knew what happened to Brandy. She said that Brian told her of a story one time of a young girl that appeared to be mentally handicapped. Brandy actually was brain damaged. I don't know to what extent or why, what exactly the situation was, but she did suffer some sort of brain damage. So this kind of already sealed the deal for authorities, for Amy, for Kristin, all of Brandy's family. So Brian told Amy that this disabled girl showed up to his doorstep and he saw it as a great opportunity. And we already know from his treatment that he was impulsive. So he would see a great opportunity and immediately act on it. There didn't have to be premeditation. He was just not right. So he decided to drag this little girl in the house and he stabbed her repeatedly, but that didn't kill her. So she was alive the entire time she was being stabbed and brutally attacked. Knowing his past behavior, he more than likely sexually assaulted her, and then he decided to slit her throat, which was what ended up killing her. So he also told Amy that he wanted to further do things to this little girl's body. So he decided he was going to put her in the bathtub. And in his own words, he was too excited, so he turned the hot water on instead of the cold water, which actually sped up her bleeding, and this made it impossible for him to do any of these plans that he had with her body. I don't know what those plans were. Honestly, I don't want to know what those plans were. He had no choice but to find a way to get rid of her. So he kind of left her there for a while planning this out. Neighbors started complaining of a strange smell, and this started alarming him, so his decision was to chop her up and put her in trash bags and wait for the next trash day for her to be disposed of. So he did this, kept the trash can away from people, and neighbors started complaining again. They said, "Your trash smells now, what is going on?" And obviously he had an answer for this. He told them that he had rotten meat in his trash can. And this was brilliant on his part because obviously no one's going to look in a trash can if they think rotten meat is in it. So it's going to deter people from investigating further, and it's going to, basically eliminate any suspicion they might have had. So he put the trash at the end of the street, and basically her body was thrown into a landfill. Now, again, his wife Amy had no idea this was real, and no idea that this wasn't just this imaginary story. So when he was found as the Canal Killer, he had actually already been questioned when they were looking for Brandy, and I think they knew of his record at this point, so authorities were probably standing just feet away from Brandy's body. And because this young girl came forward with the story about this Smitty's store, they were pulled away from potentially finding Brandy so much sooner, which could have stopped all the Canal killings, you know, potential killings in Washington when he moved. There's no telling how many women are on the list of his victims. Justice was delayed for so long. To think that they went and questioned this man, and she could have been in his bathtub at the time. He probably was standing there in his doorway, the same doorway where he pulled her in and stabbed her and slit her throat. It's just mind-blowing, you know. He had taken pictures with these same police officers. But at this point, it was 2014, and it had been years, and there was no way of searching the landfill. There was no way of trying to find her body. Authorities decided to go back and search the house that he supposedly killed her in, and at this point it had been renovated so heavily that it wasn't even the same house anymore. Any DNA that might have been there, first of all, it had been 25 years. There's no way they were finding it. Every chance was just kind of taken away in that giant time frame. They decided to go to his new house, where he moved after he moved back from living in Washington for a time period, and authorities described it as a hoarding situation. But this is ideal for when it comes to solving these murders and finding the amount of evidence that they need. It appeared as if he had been keeping, I guess, mementos of his murders, because there are some reports that 2 rusty bikes were pulled from the home. And keep in mind, Angela and Melanie's bikes were never found. Now, I cannot confirm this. Authorities are keeping everything very tight-lipped until the trial is over. And again, I'm not aware if it's over or not for Angela and Melanie, but it's very possible if he had those bikes that he had something from Brandy. But everything was gone through. They pulled everything possible out of his home. I mean, they tore both houses apart looking for DNA for Brandy, because it was so obvious at this point that he was the one who did something to her. And I will get into even more evidence in the next few minutes. But unfortunately, from what I know, they weren't able to find anything unless they're just keeping it very quiet. Kristin decided to call the young girl who claimed this whole Smitty story happened and ask her to retract this story, because Kristin knew deep down from the beginning, and you know, years and years in going through everything, that none of that was really adding up, because Brandy would never spend the money that she'd worked so hard on for the bookathon on candy and toys. She was so excited about the donations at the very end, and she had read every single one of the books. And Kristin was armed with a ton of information when she called this girl. Apparently, there were witnesses. There were 2 witnesses that were probably the real ones to last see Brandy. So Brandy had gone on this bookathon. There were, I think in total, actually 3 witnesses. There was one of Kristin's friends, and Brandy stopped at this girl's house on her route. And she said, "Hey, I'm gathering money for this bookathon. Will you go with me? My sister wouldn't go." And unfortunately, the girl had to decline. But that is one person that proved she was on the route she was supposed to be on. And then the last people to more than likely see Brandy was a couple. And she stopped at this couple's house for this bookathon. She moved on to the next house. The couple watched her knock on the door, and that family wasn't home. And do you know the next house she would have gone to? Brian Miller's. This whole story about Smitty's seemed like it was just fabricated. And when Kristin called this girl, the girl claimed she never even made that statement, and she said she would not retract it, that she didn't want anything to do with it. She claimed that she had no idea why authorities and Kristin were calling her so many times. She said that she never made that statement, never said any of that. And I'm sorry, but you don't forget that. You know, this girl, if she was around Brandy's age, she was about 13 years old. I can remember every encounter I've ever had with a police officer, just bare minimum, for even things that aren't super important. But imagine there being helicopters and dogs in your neighborhood. This girl lived in the apartment complex, and there is tape all around your home, and officers are knocking on your door, banging on doors everywhere, trying to find this little girl, and you're the last person to claim to see her. You don't forget that. You do not forget claiming to be the last person to see someone. So what Kristin thinks, and what a lot of other people think, is that she just fabricated this story to get attention. And unfortunately, this isn't uncommon. People have this strange desire to insert themselves into situations. And I've talked about this a few times on my channel, but it's kind of like when you're on the highway and you're driving by an accident, and it's like, it doesn't matter if the accident's on the side of the road. For some reason, everyone is slowing down because they just want to stare at it and like know what's going on. We call it rubbernecking here. I don't know if anyone else calls it that, but we call it rubbernecking when everyone's just like looking over here, trying to see the accident. You know, if, for instance, something happens, like there's a fire in an apartment, you know, everyone wants to come outside. Everyone wants to ask what's going on. People are just nosy. And if there's news reporters involved, or this sense of, you know, attention being put on you, a lot of people will make things up to continue that attention. And I think that's just human nature. And I think that's what happened in this situation. It's just a mess, and it's really prevented Brandy's case from being solved. And now it more than likely is going to prevent her from getting justice to this day, despite this confession from the ex-wife and all of these other, you know, circumstantial bits of evidence. So the investigators at this point were absolutely convinced that Brian was the one that kidnapped and killed Brandy. You know, it makes sense why her body's never been found anywhere. She was put in the trash and taken to the dump. So they decided to send a request into the court to charge him for Brandy's abduction and murder, because, you know, they had this evidence. They had the last people that saw her walking to his house. They had the girl that said Brandy stopped by and asked for her to walk with her. Kristin saw her go in that direction. The only thing taking them away from all of that information was this one girl's story, and this girl's now claiming she never said that or did any of that. So it's incredibly frustrating, and they were hoping that the courts would go along with this circumstantial evidence and choose to charge him, because it's not as circumstantial as it seems. He has the track record. It's like this map, and all of it just leads directly back to him. But the court denied it because there is no body and they wanted more evidence. And we know, because I did the solved no body on here, that it is possible to charge someone for murder without the body being there. But I will say, the ones I've seen, there is usually some sort of DNA evidence left behind, some proof that that person was at least in the space that the killer was in. So unfortunately, because they didn't have that for Brandy, the court won't do anything. And the court didn't just deny this motion once, it denied it twice. So at this point, the cold case detective sat Kristin down and looked her in the face and said, I can't do anything else. We know that he killed her. We know that we have, at this point, 3 witnesses that put her on the route to his home that day. 4, including Kristin, who saw her turn around the corner to go to his house. And they can't dig up the landfill. They don't have any DNA. So he said the only way at this point to get the courts to charge him is to create a public pressure. So that is what we are here for today. This is where a platform like this comes in. This is where we can really make a difference. You know, we can't physically go out and solve the cases that we talk about. We can't even physically go out and talk to some of the people who are affected by it. But, you know, the one thing we can do right now is put this public pressure on Maricopa County, which is the county that this is all happening in. And I'm always saying, what more can I do? You guys are always saying, what more can we do? This is it. Basically, there is no way Brandy will get justice unless the county chooses to try to charge Brian Miller with Brandy's murder. And I know when we see situations like this, we sit down and we think, okay, the reason they're not charging is because there's not enough evidence. And if it gets thrown out because of double jeopardy, we can't charge again. But in this case, there will never be more evidence. And I will never forget when I talked to Kristin at CrimeCon. She didn't explain everything to me, but she kind of breezed over it and said, we know who killed her. The court wants more evidence. There will never be more evidence. And in this case, it's the truth. There's never going to be more DNA. There is never going to be something found. All the places they potentially could have found something have been so redone that there is no way. They were led away by this potential false lead at the beginning. There won't ever be more evidence. So at this point, trying, even if it fails, is still closer to justice than anything else they're going to receive at this point. So while in normal cases you wouldn't want to, you would want to wait for more, there isn't anything else. And right now they're relying on circumstantial evidence. And part of the circumstantial evidence are witnesses that saw her heading to Brian's house. And this is the couple. And guess what? The couple is getting old and life goes as it goes, and they are going to pass away in the future. And once they are gone, that takes away the little bit of circumstantial evidence that there is for Brandy, and that will just totally ruin everything. If it fails, it fails, but it's better than going on knowing he is just getting away scot-free for this. So Kristin has dedicated all of this time now just pushing for her sister. I cannot even tell you guys the hustle this girl put on at CrimeCon. I saw her walking around like a little tornado with her clipboard and her stack of papers, and she went and she talked to every single person that attended. I bet you, if you were out there, I know a couple of my subscribers were there, I bet you money you know who I'm talking about. She was not giving up, and that clipboard was letters to Maricopa County that she was having people sign, asking for them to charge Brian for Brandy's case. I signed one of those, Powell signed one of those, I'm pretty sure John Lorden signed one of those. There is a way to put this public pressure on, and she cannot do it by herself anymore. She's gone to every single one of Brian's court dates, and she isn't technically a victim because Brandy's not listed on the victim list, so she's sitting on the side of the courtroom where she could potentially be sitting beside people that support him. Imagine how that feels, and still she's there by herself. Imagine knowing what happened to your sister and not being able to charge the person responsible. I strongly believe that he is never, ever going to admit what he did to Brandy. He denies killing both Angela and Melanie. He has no explanation though for how his DNA got all over them, but he is sticking to his ground that he didn't kill them. I think he just has this obsession with being dominant. It shows in his sexual behavior, which was already marked as something terrifying by a therapist and something that he needed to deal with. You know, he wants to be dominant and he wants to always remain in control. And if he admitted to killing any of these women, especially Brandy, when they have no body and can't prove it, to him, that's going to be defeat. That is going to be him, you know, backing down and no longer being the dominant one. All that Kristin is asking at this point is that people send in emails, people send in letters, people call and ask for the courts to charge him with Brandy's murder, and she can't do that by herself. She cannot create this public pressure. She's been trying to do it for years, and it has just been so incredibly difficult. She's one person, she has one voice, she does not have the platform to create an uproar over it. I've already announced something on Twitter, and I think she got over 100 followers just from me mentioning Brandy's name and tagging her. You know, that's something that has been so difficult for her to achieve, and that's just a retweet, you guys. That is literally just one tweet. Imagine what this video can do, and all of you guys watching it, if everyone took a second out of their day to send a quick email. This channel has always been about the little guys. It's always been about the smaller cases and the people who are struggling to do things on their own and things that don't get enough attention. This case is literally the epitome of what this channel stands for and what this channel means. We can all come together on a platform like this and help someone else. You don't have to know this person. You don't have to, you know, physically be there, but just because we don't have that doesn't mean we can't make change. And that is something that I stand for and strongly believe in. and I know you guys feel the same way. So I'm linking everything I possibly can down below for you guys to get in touch with Maricopa County. I am doing the exact same thing. Brandy deserves justice. Her family is destroyed. Their whole family was just obliterated the day that she left and never came back. And the fact that the courts won't even give them a chance, it's time to make up for all of the lost time and, you know, the false leads and false starts, and the fact that this man was just waving himself in front of authorities knowing what he did. And I'm so incredibly happy for Angela and Melanie's families that they finally have justice years later. These two girls went out for a bike ride and didn't come back. Like, how do you leave with intentions to do something so innocent and be so brutally attacked by a psycho killer? Thank you guys so much for taking the time out of your day to listen to Brandy's story. I know you guys will help me, and I know you will help Kristin, and we need to push as much as possible. And I know that taking a few minutes out of your day seems inconvenient, but imagine having your entire life taken because of a person like Brian Miller. And I think we can all dedicate just a few minutes out of our day today to send an email in super fast to force these people to do something about it. So let's see what we can do for Brandy all together. I'm gonna stop rambling at this point. I send all of my love to Kristin. I send all of my love to Brandy's family. I hope we are able to do something with this channel. This channel's here for a reason, and this is the reason, exactly. Thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button, become a part of the Hallan fam so we can bring them home and bring them justice together. Thank you guys, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.
She never got her first kiss. She never got to fall in love or have her heart broken. I have words to say that I waited more than 20 years to say to the person who took my life with hers.